So I wanted to talk to someone who had, in-person policy expertise on the outcomes of all of the different decisions that have been made regarding immigration policy over the past several months underneath the Biden administration. Just give me your overall perspective on what brought us to this moment and why we're seeing the images that we're seeing on the border.
Well, it's purely politics because, we briefed the incoming administration, the Biden administration, of what we've done to give us the most secure border of my lifetime. That's just not words. The data showed it, right? 83% decline in illegal immigration, a 40-year low. And they were briefed hundreds of times, not just by me, but members of CBP and other agencies, that if you did away with certain policies, excuse me, you would see the success quickly go away. In the first 2 weeks that Joe Biden became president, he issued over 90 executive orders, 90, that basically abolished every policy that worked under Trump that gave us the most secure border. So this wasn't on accident. This isn't mismanagement. This isn't incompetence. They purposely, and I said this many times in my speeches across the country, Joe Biden's the first president in the history of this country who came in office and unsecured a border. Understand that every president I've worked for, I worked for 6 starting around Reagan. Even Clinton, Obama came in office saying, we got to do something about the border because they understood you can't have national security without border security. Some did more than others. No one did more than Trump, of course. But Biden's first president came in office and unsecured the most secure border we've ever had on purpose for political ideology. And what's happening right now is historic illegal immigration. I wrote an op-ed for FoxNews.com 6 months before Election Day. And I said, if Joe Biden becomes president, we lose the border. Just based on what he was promising. Moratorium on deportations, amnesty, DACA, free health care for illegal aliens, shut down private prisons so there's no detention. Who the hell wouldn't want to come to the greatest nation on earth if you know you can cross the border, be released, and even if you lose your case, which 88% will lose their case if they don't qualify under rules of asylum, they won't be removed because at the same time they decapitated ICE. Secretary of Homeland Security has said being in the country illegally on its own is not enough to be removed. It's not enough to be arrested by ICE. So they set the stage, and here we are where we're at. Historic illegal immigration.
One thing that I think escapes a lot of notice, or certainly did until the last couple of years, was the degree to which cartels profit from trafficking in humans across the border. That they, charge people to bring them to the border, that they have more control on their side than we do on ours. Why do you think that that's something that hasn't really, until fairly recently, penetrated the minds of a lot of political leaders who just seem to be or have been unfamiliar with that type of activity?
I don't understand. I've been pushing that for the last 2 years. Again, for the most American people, if they don't watch Fox News or listen to shows like yours, they don't even know there's a border crisis because other networks aren't covering it. But the criminal cartels, make no mistake, you're exactly right. The criminal cartels have operational control of our southern border. And that's just not my opinion. That's not just based on intelligence reports. If you talk to chief patrol agents, most of them are my friends. I won't give you names because they'll get in trouble. But most chief patrol agents on the southern border have said they don't have operational control of the border. One chief patrol agent used the term broken arrow. He goes, Tom, I can't contain what's coming across. I'm maybe crabbing 10% at best. Some sectors like El Paso, 90% of the agents are off the line. They're not patrolling because they're in facilities processing. Matter of fact, he had video, Bill Maloogian had video yesterday, hundreds of them just walking across the border into the city of El Paso with no border patrol agents stopping them or talking to them because they're not there. So the criminal cartels certainly control our border. And I said after the election that those cheering the most were criminal cartels in Mexico because they're back in business. That is why there's so much violence in Mexico right now, because criminal cartels making a record amount of money on moving fentanyl and other drugs. They're making a record amount of money on illegal immigration. They're making a record amount of money on trafficking of women and children for sexual purposes. And they're making a record amount of money on moving criminals and probably non-suspected terrorists, because you got to pay the cartel so much money if you just want to cross the border and turn yourselves over to the border patrol agent. But if you want to escape the patrol and you want to get to Chicago without being arrested, You got to pay a little bit more, and they'll get you to Chicago. So they're making more money than they've ever made, and that's why you see so much violence in Mexico. The criminal cartels are fighting each other for control of the plazas, their areas. They call them plazas, and so they're fighting right now who controls these plazas. They're making a godly amount of money, billions of dollars. So it's the criminal cartels control everything on the border. When I say that, I say 200 migrants just don't show up and cross at a certain point at a certain time all by themselves. The criminal cartels tell people where to cross, when to cross, at what time to cross, and how many can cross. Because what they want to do is send 200 groups to one area, knowing Border Patrol, whatever's left on the line, will seize that opportunity and go deal with that humanitarian crisis, which leaves this part of the border wide open. That's when they move the fentanyl. That's when they move the guys that don't want to be arrested. And people need to understand, when I say they've arrested 116 people that try to get into this country that they're on the terrorist screening database. There's over 1 million recorded gotaways, known gotaways. Terrorists don't want to be arrested. Why did 1 million people want to escape? Why didn't they want to cross the border, get a free airline ticket to the city of their choice, and be released? Why? Because they don't want to be fingerprinted. That 1 million gotaways should scare the hell out of everybody.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that is so infuriating about this is that it feels like the conversation hasn't caught up with the reality in Washington, meaning that oftentimes I hear the same kinds of language around immigrant movement as I heard during the debate over the guest worker bills and things like that, 15 plus years ago, when in reality, this is a very different makeup in terms of the populations that we're seeing coming, the persistence of family units, et cetera, and the like. And it just doesn't map. It doesn't have the same character to it as it did back in the day. What's the number one thing that you would say to a member of Congress to get them to have their head screwed on straight about the nature of the difference between the way that immigration flows worked 15, 20 years ago and the way they work today?
Well, first of all, I would tell members of Congress this isn't what we've ever seen before, because we got people from 160 countries. 160 countries. Back when I was a Border Patrol agent in the 80s, 95% of everybody arrested was a Mexican national. You may have a few Central Americans, but you never arrested people from Turkey and China and Russia. In El Paso the other day, they had a large group get away, and one of the Border Patrol agents talked to one of the El Paso police officers, said the whole group was either from Turkey or Russia, running across the border. So I would say, first of all, this is a worldwide issue because 160 different countries are entering the United States. And I would say, look, I don't care what your opinion is on illegal immigration. You have your opinion, whatever. But when you cause a crisis this big that takes 80 to 90% of agents off the line, that's when the fentanyl comes across to kill 100,000 Americans. There's been 1,400 migrant deaths on U.S. soil under Joe Biden, which is the record by far. A record number of migrants are dying. A record number of Americans are dying. The sex trafficking of women are at an all-time high. We've had over 250,000 kids across the border, children, and they've been released to so-called sponsors. They can't find 40% of them. 40% of them had vanished. They don't know what happened to them. How many of these kids are stuck in some sort of sexual perversion? How many of these kids are being forced labor? How many of these kids are being abused by child predators? God help us. So I would tell the lawmakers, I don't care what your opinion on illegal immigration, when you cause a crisis this big, you bring public safety issues, you bring public health issues, you bring national security issues. You have to pay attention to what's going on the border. You can't have national security without border security. And I leave it at this. Look, after 9/11, we always said, never forget, after 9/11, we created databases, the TSA no-fly list, the FBI screening database, the visa security program. All these systems were built to prevent the next terrorist from getting a visa or plane ticket coming to the United States. And those databases have worked pretty damn good. The visa security program has prevented at least 8,000 people with derogatory information on getting a visa since it's been implemented 15 years ago. Now, those databases, even though they remain important, are less meaningful. Because why, if you're a terrorist, why would you try to get an airline ticket or a visa and go through vetting and possibly be outed and find out who you are, when you can simply go to Mexico and cross the border the way 1 million others did and get away, pay the cartels a little bit of extra money and say, when you send that family group this way, send me to Chicago, get me to Chicago. That should scare the hell out of everybody, not just senators and congressmen, the American people. This is a national security issue. So get off your ass, put politics aside and secure the border, because I tell you what, I don't know how many terrorists have crossed the border since Joe Biden become president, but someday we're going to find out, and it's going to be a bad day for America.
Last question before I let you go. Obviously the White House is in a bind politically on this because their left flank doesn't want them to do anything that could be compared to the approach used by former President Trump. And yet at the same time, I think there is an awareness among a lot of red state Democrats, many of whom are up in the next election, that those are exactly the kind of policies that they need to put into place again. Otherwise, this is going to be an out of control situation. How do you think that that's going to end up playing out? And do you believe that the White House is ultimately going to be forced to do some things that Joe Biden may not want to do and the progressives certainly don't want him to do, only because there's really no other solution?
Okay, that's a great question. You obviously have a good insight on this issue. What I've been saying is the reason they need to have oversight hearings, when they take back the House, have oversight hearings, an investigation to see, I'm sure there's enough to impeach Mayorkas. But even the hearings themselves, you subpoena the right people, you subpoena the information. And I met with over 100 GOP congressman said, I'll help you. I know where the bodies are buried. I know what you look for, where to look for it, and who to call in. Because there's going to be so much damning information comes out of these things that those Democrats that are running for office in 2024, are they going to be forced to see what's produced? They're going to be forced to have to acknowledge this isn't it. Wow. This is almost criminal. This is almost treasonous. They're going to have to take a side. So I think the oversight hearing is going to serve a purpose in 2024 that these vulnerable Democrats are going to have to admit, we've lost control of the border. This is a national security issue. We need to take a stand. So that's the number one thing I want the GOP to do when they take back the House. Oversight hearings, educate the American people what's really happening with evidence, then force them to make a stand.
Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.